That interested.
Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to part 7 of my bookshelf tour, where I'm once again going to set my timer and see how far I can get through the content on my bookshelf in about 10 minutes, maybe a little over, we'll see. I realized that I kind of didn't... I skipped a bunch of my Nintendo DS and Game Boy Advance games. I mentioned, I think, just one of them, and then I got caught up on other things on my bookshelf. So I wanted to, before going on with the rest of my PS2 games, backtrack a little bit and cover the handheld stuff, because I also keep my my two handheld consoles stuffed up there on my bookshelf above my video games too. The first would be my Nintendo DS, specifically my DS Lite, which I bought because you can play 2 generations of video games on it that I had never been able to play before, which is the Game Boy Advance generation of games and the Nintendo DS generation of games. And my main reason for getting that was 2 game series. One was Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and all kind of like the follow-ups to that were side-scrolling, kind of like open world castle type, environments that you can explore and stuff. What people typically call Metroidvania, but I want a different word because a lot of Metroidvania games don't have the experience system and that kind of like progression system that was in the Symphony of the Night and the games that followed it. So maybe Igavania after the guy who created the series. But anyway, the other games I wanted to mention, let's see, on DS, Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey. And this is based on a Japanese series, if you couldn't tell, of video games that are kind of post-apocalyptic, but it's also a weird kind of Pokemon type situation where you're going around and you're fighting monsters, and then you recruit them to join your team, and then you can blend them with other monsters to create new monsters that will kind of help you out. It's a lot like what I understand Pokemon to be, but not at all cute, which is really kind of cool. I actually have not finished this game or the other one, the PS2 game in the series that I have, which I'll get to when I talk about it. And I just kind of lost interest. There was something about kind of the looting stuff. So I've just until looking at them this time, I was like, maybe I'll get back to them. But I'm starting to think, I should probably start looking to sell these. The other series that I bought my DS for was Dragon Quest. I really enjoyed the Dragon Quest. At least the first one on NES, and then I really enjoyed Dragon Quest VIII. I love those classic turn-based RPGs, and I slowly have kind of gotten caught up with the series because of the remakes that were made for the Nintendo DS. And so right now I am playing through Dragon Quest VI Realms of Revelation. The problem is, and the reason I haven't finished this one yet, is because the same studio used a lot of the same art assets to create 3 Dragon Quest remakes in a row, 4, 5, and 6. And so I played through 4, I played through 5, and just by the time I got to 6, I was like, man, this is like the exact same music, I think, but a lot of the same like art assets and enemy, like the enemy art assets, a lot of them are exactly the same. They haven't changed at all. It's still a nice upgrade over the originals, but it's been a little bit tough to stay interested in that. So I am going to hang on to Dragon Quest VI. I do want to finish it. It's just been a while since I've really been in the mood for it. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. Now I'm a big fan of the original Final Fantasy Tactics on PlayStation 1, which I've already talked about, and I wanted kind of a follow-up experience to that. I got this. It definitely has some weaknesses. It's not near as complex and maybe just narrow in strategy as sometimes the original could be in my experience. So that can be a plus, but at the same time, I liked a lot of the other complexity that was there. One of the biggest problems I have with this is there's a kind of a law card system where almost arbitrarily every time you enter into a battle a new law takes place, like you can't use this ability, you can't use this sword, you can't use this type of magic, and it's just kind of like arbitrarily making the battle more complex or difficult, and I'm like, I'm not a big fan of that. I can usually work around it, and in fact, you can just walk around on the world map and let the laws cycle through until you see some laws are in place that don't really, concern your strategy, and as far as I know, the game is not time sensitive. You don't have to complete it by a certain in-game date, so I've been able to use that strategy to avoid annoying battles, but it's still a little bit lame to kind of have to walk back and forth. Probably the bigger issue with me is that it's a pain in the butt in the user interface to kind of like check out the different equipment and armor and all those kinds of options when you're in a store. I can't even describe to you why it's just you're having to go in and out of, of different menus and layers of menus to find the things that you want and compare equipment. It's really hard to compare equipment. That's kind of the biggest problem. So I love, the combat. I also miss some of the more, the animations that are possible in 3D as opposed to what you can get on a Game Boy Advance game. But I'm willing to kind of forgive those kinds of things. It's just all a little bit less than Final Fantasy Tactics on the PlayStation 1. So it's one that I definitely plan on keeping. I'm close to finishing. I think I'm 3/4 of the way through, but my pace has just kind of slowed down toward the end here. I save my DS games these days for when I am on vacation, when I do not have an option, when I'm elsewhere to play an actual console game. So that's one of the main reasons I'm going so slow on a lot of these portable games. The last two games in my DS/Game Boy Advance collection are Luminous Arc and Tactics Ogre: The Night of Lotus. These are other kinds of tactics-style games. I haven't started either one of these games. They're just kind of like in my backlog that I plan to get to eventually. All right, moving on to PlayStation Portable/PS Vita games. Let's see, again, the reason I bought a PlayStation Vita was a lot of the same reason I bought a Nintendo DS Lite, because you could play 2 generations of video games on it, many of which have not been available on any home console systems. Of course, now I bought the PS TV, so a lot of these Vita and PSP games I can play on home console, such as God of War 1 and 2. I've been in anticipation of the new God of War 4 game. I was like, I did enjoy those first 2 games on PlayStation 2. I wasn't able to follow the series because I got a 360 instead of a PS3, but I'm going back now. I played through most of God of War 1. I got super frustrated toward the end. In fact, I put a video up about should Christians rage quit, and you can see me being really frustrated and angry with my experience with God of War 1. So anyway, that video's on this channel if you want to check it out. I'm about to start playing God of War 2. These games, it's hard for me to really recommend them to anyone because of, some people just aren't going to be into the violent, hardcore 300 style, violence and blood and stuff like that. But even more so, is the nudity that can sometimes pop up. And so, for me, as those scenes pop up, well, first of all, when the Medusas or the enemies that you're fighting in these, at least in these first 2 games, are in the rare instances where you have a character that's nude, like the Medusas, if I remember correctly, are topless, but it's hard to see. They're really, the graphic fidelity. So I don't find that to be, a source of any kind of temptation. I do, just to be safe during the cutscenes, I kind of just keep track in my peripheral vision. I don't think they would be a problem for me, but I mean, just to be safe, I'm like, yeah, let's fire through this dialogue and da-da-da. Okay, now back to the cool gameplay that I'm really in it for, So that's kind of my thoughts on how I approach the God of War games. Interesting, just kind of like the type of games that the God of War games are, because they're all about anger. They're all about a man who feels like he's been treated unjustly by the gods. And, I think you look at the story and you say, well, yeah, there's, he made some foolish decisions, but at the same time, these gods are clearly corrupt and fallen and stuff. And I think that this kind of story can actually be really satisfying to both believers and non-believers who are just being put through the ringer in life, and they feel that temptation, that desire to just lash out at God and say, God, this is your fault. Why are you doing this? And I think there's room for some of that, maybe not that complete feeling of like actually having hatred toward God, but there is certainly room in Scripture, if you read your Psalms, for us to say, God, where are you? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Why are you allowing this to happen? And so I think there's room for us to kind of enter into that kind of like really passionate, even angry and frustrated dialogue with God, provided it doesn't move into a place of hate. That's one thing that the psalmists provide as kind of a foundation is, God, I understand that you're good. I know that you are good and you are holy and you are just. But in light of that, I do not get why this is happening, So anyway, I think it's interesting just to kind of see from a non-biblical perspective the outworking of what is a very natural, I think, tendency of ours to have anger and hate toward God when we're just, our lives are just going down the crapper, Anyway, so those games are just kind of interesting thematically for me to kind of play through, in addition to just enjoying the gameplay itself. Next on Vita is Untold Legends Brotherhood of the Blade. This is the first of maybe 3 games that are kind of in that Champions of Norath style of top-down Diablo clone hack and slash RPG looting game. And this is a nice kind of like, I don't know, placeholder until that great and distant day when AAA studios return to this genre of top-down Diablo clone. I just loved all of them, as I've mentioned before, that were released on the PS2. And now, you know, we've got Diablo 3 and Path of Exiles on PC, and so there are some big high-profile ones. Torchlight, arguably, you know, is a front-runner in that genre. But there just doesn't seem to be as many of them in kind of like the main AAA space of game development. I'd love to see a return to that. Untold Legends, I find it to be unsatisfying to play as a Magic user, or there's 3 options. Ultimately, I settled on Fighter, you know, which usually is like my last option. It's just kind of so basic, but I just didn't like the progression and the abilities of the other character classes, the way they were treated in this game. So, but anyway, it's a nice placeholder for that kind of game for me. Final Fantasy IV Complete Collection. I'm getting into games now. The reason I'm not like showing you, you know, like boxes, or because these are downloaded games, but they're games that are installed on my PlayStation Vita. I'm not going to go through the games that I've purchased and are not currently installed. I'm trying to stick with what is relevant to where I'm at as a gamer right now. That's what I feel like my bookshelf represents. If I'm not into it now, it doesn't stay on my bookshelf super long. It's usually something I'm going to be looking to sell at some point, or I have some other purpose in mind for. So anyway, the Final Fantasy IV Complete Collection. A lot of people, Final Fantasy IV. Okay, I got to wrap it up after this one. For a lot of people, Final Fantasy IV is their favorite in the Final Fantasy series. It wasn't mine. I played it after Final Fantasy VI/3. So I played, you know, Super NES Final Fantasy III, and then I played Super NES Final Fantasy II, which in actual numbering in Japan was number 4. I really did enjoy it, though. It just, for me, because of where it fell, was a step down from, you know, technologically from Final Fantasy VI, and I also found the story much more engaging in 6/3. But I bought the Complete Collection because there's been this new kind of like standalone expansion game that continues the story of Final Fantasy IV, and the graphics also got a really nice kind of upgrade. And I was, you know, in the mood for specifically a Final Fantasy type, like old school Final Fantasy type of experience. So I waited for a sale, and then I picked up Final Fantasy IV Complete Collection. And it's like my DS. I just play it basically when I am on vacation and I don't have a console around. Every once in a while, I'll play it on my PlayStation TV, but usually just when I'm, you know, out and about and I don't have a console. So not my favorite in the series, but I am enjoying it for what it is, you know, when the appropriate moment comes to play that kind of game. Okay, so that's it. Next time I'm going to finish up my portable games, and then I'll get back into maybe Final Fantasy 12, although there's probably going to be a video that goes up before then. I don't know. I got lots to say about Final Fantasy 12. I don't know if I'm going to fit it into one video or not. Anyway, I'll talk more about that another time. Thanks. Bye-bye.